Guruve Gaura Chandraya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadabhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpaturubhescha Kripa Sindhubevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dandavad Pranam, Vaishnavas, Vaishnavis, Maharajas. I want to offer my Koti Dandavad Pranam at the lotus seat of my Guru Parapadma, Nitya Lila Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paribrajaka Jojo, Stotara Satta Sisimad, Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, on to the lotus feet of my Param Guru Devs. Nitya Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Jajastu Tarasata Sisima Chila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Jajastu Tarasata Sisima Acharya Keshri Srila Bhakti Pragaran Keshav Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Arupanuga Guru Varga Shri Sachinandan Gaura Hari my own Shishi Gaura Gadadha Shishi Radha Vallabhju Ki Jai. So this is number 7 in the series about preaching in Africa. I certainly hope I got the numbering right. I believe I do. But this is number 7. And this session will kind of conclude the remainder of our preaching in Ghana and some isolated, not sequential incidents that took place during the preaching in Africa that were really, really impactful. And it'll also glorify one devotee who did very, very amazing service in Africa and was very dedicated. And I'll wait till I get to that section, and not to make it a surprise, but I want that section to stand alone. So we had left off where Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, of course, had come to Ghana, and he had stayed for 2 weeks to 10 days, and we continued going out preaching. There were some, pretty funny stories that had taken place while Maharaj was there, and there were also some, obviously a great inspiration and expansion to the preaching. The devotees had been really, really inspired, and we were starting to expand. So our crowd was our main base, but we had developed a farm. Gopal Prabhu and his good wife and some other devotees and some local devotees who he had started to make in Koko had a farm community. So I think I mentioned before I would go there from time to time and spend some days there and preach there. And then we also had gone up to Kumasi. I remember going up to Kumasi, and we went to visit the Asantehini. Now, Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj had also gone there, and he'd already, I believe, visited the Asantehini, or maybe that would come in the future, but he had certainly visited him, and of course made a, the kind of spiritual impression that devotees of his caliber can make. So that was very interesting, because the Asantehini, he is like the leader of the Ashanti people, which is a huge tribe. The main language in Ghana is Twi, and it is the native language of the Ashanti people. So, Ghana, pretty much the face of Ghana in many ways. I don't want to detract from, the other ethnic groups who live there, because they all make such a big contribution and very powerful. But the Ashanti is kind of the face, the kente cloth, especially the style of drumming that you see coming out of Ghana with the frontum and the huge drums and so forth. So that's all part of the Ashanti tradition. So I remember we went on a preaching escapade to Kumasi, and I, wanted to meet the Asantehini, which is not easy to do. He's royalty, literally royalty. So Africa's, comparable position to, a king or queen in any other country, England or wherever. So one of the things about the visit that you notice is that whenever the Asantehini comes and he's going to give audience to someone, they always speak through a linguist. So there's always 2 people who are standing on either side of him, and they hold staffs. and these are the linguists. So you speak to them, and then they, even though the Asante Hene is super educated, I think he's a PhD, and he speaks English and everything, but it's just in the tradition that you'll speak to the linguist, he'll translate into Twi and back and forth like this. So it's a very formalized sort of thing, but he's very, very kind, very, very kind, likes devotees. So it's a very, very wonderful visit. There wasn't much. I mean, we gave some books, of course, and Srila Bhakti Maharaj's impression on him was, extremely great. I've separated the two meetings because I just can't remember clearly if I was at the meeting when Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj went. I know I met him prior, I believe. And actually, I think we told him about Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and showed him pictures and everything. So that was a good thing that we were able to do. So anyway, one of the other things I had requested while we were there in the royal compound in Kumasi was I wanted to see or even get one lesson in the royal drumming that takes place there. So I went over and I met these gentlemen, and I don't know if I can find, I'm going to see if I can find kind of a picture of what everything looks like. And it'll give you some sense of what things are like. So bear with me 1 second while I try to pull this up. All right, yeah, so I was able to find a few things, and one, this is actually a picture of the Asante Hene. I think this must be the current Asante Hene of Ghana. So you can see the gentleman that I mentioned right in the background there with the staff, and those are his linguists. Then they're the royal guards. Now, mind you, what you're seeing there, that's not fake gold. That's all real gold. The actual gold mines in Ghana, a lot of them are in Kumasi, but also it's a super opulent tradition, and so all of that gold you see is actual. And of course, you can see the beautiful kente cloth, which is something that's really, really, become popular. I'm trying to get one other photo for you to give you an idea of the drumming that I was talking about. Let me see. Well, here's a slight picture of it. So you can see these drums here. This is in a procession. So it's a little different from when you see the ensemble all set up. But when you see the ensemble set up, then, there's like sets of maybe 6 or 7 drums, and they're all huge. And they're played by normally the drummers there. I'll see if I can track down one picture of the drummers and kind of what they look like, because it's not something that that you can easily do. I mean, you've got to be in shape to do this. All right, so I'm just looking for a picture of that, so bear with me. All right. Again, forgive me for this. I don't like so much time to pass without doing the narration, but I think this is, sometimes pictures, they lend so much to things because you can kind of get a vision of what it is that we were able to see. Well, it doesn't look like there's a lot more here, and it's going into other things. But if you ever get a chance to see it, in person, it's a pretty amazing thing. So yeah, we'll let that suffice. But yeah, it's a pretty amazing thing. So while I was there, back to the actual story, while we were there, I wanted to actually see a live version of, you know, what the drums were like and everything. So there wasn't a particular ceremony or anything going on at that time, so I could not see it in action related to a ceremony. But some of the drummers I was able to go and talk to. Normally these guys are usually, either they're very much elders, or they're young guys who look like Mr. Universe or something, because they're all in super shape, I guess, which it requires to play those drums, you know, for long periods of at a time, in the heat and everything else. So I talked to one of the drummers and I asked him about what it takes to learn, you know, how to play the front-and-from and all of these royal drums. So he said, you need to speak the language. You have to be able to speak Twi, because the way that they teach people is that you learn parables, like lessons or sayings in Twi that are like, you know, meaningful, you know, phrases. And then those phrases are what's repeated on the drums. So a lead drummer will play a phrase and all the other drummers immediately can pick it up and they play that phrase. So it's like the drums, just like in Nigeria you have talking drums, because the Yoruba language is tonal. You can actually emulate the language on the drum in the same way the front-and-from does the same thing. It speaks the language. And I would imagine that tradition is there in most of African drumming related to the language. So anyway, the Royal Palace, the seeing of the drums, the meaning of the Sante Hini, and doing Naga Sankirtan in Kumasi and distributing a bunch of books was just wonderful. So I remember also when I was about to leave Ghana, because in this section I'll talk about, you know, my coming back for a brief period to America from Ghana. One of the things that the devotees had done was they had gotten some gold from the mine in Kumasi and had given me this piece of gold, and they took me to this jeweler, and the jeweler was a super craftsman. So in West Africa there's jewelry, and the artwork that they do on it is called filigree. So it's literally taking gold and carving out like a design in it where it's like open. I don't know how to describe it, but it's extremely beautiful. So, because I didn't know that I would ever return to Ghana on any kind of permanent basis, so devotees had gotten that for me, and I made the ring as a reminder or as a memento for the time being there, because Ghana was exceptionally special for me in so many ways. First of all, it was the first time that I had a whole sense of what the impact, now Nigeria had been established, Ghana was established, what the impact of what we were doing is. Of course, in Nigeria, you know, I got a sense of that to some degree, but in Ghana, I guess the fact that it was an expansion and the fact that we were making so many devotees and there were so many books going out and the expansion was so rapid. And also the nature of the lifestyle there seems so much like living in India, because I mentioned climatically, culturally, just in so many ways, there were so many similarities. And so it really had the feel of being like at a spiritual home. And, you know, obviously every temple is a dham, because the dham has the ability to expand. And the expansion of the dham is based on the nature of the purity of bhakti that exists in a place. So wherever there's a pure devotee, you have the holy dham. Similarly, where we have deities or the worship and seva of Bhagavan going on, that place becomes a dham. So having that atmosphere there, because devotees are serving the mission of Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada and our Guru Varga, then that atmosphere was there. So it was really, really very, very sweet. We also began to expand into places which were closer. Kumasi was a little farther away, but we expanded into Tema on a regular basis for preaching, and Takoradi. Takoradi was another small town. I don't remember directionally or geographically situations, but it's not so far from Accra. And we have been going there distributing books and preaching, and I know there was one family there who was like our nucleus family. It was a husband and wife. I don't remember the name, unfortunately. But there was a husband and wife, and I think there were 2 children. And they were just like a bedrock of assisting us in preaching there. I spoke to Pujapat Shanta Maharaj the other day, and he mentioned that he remembers that the husband was the warden for the local prison there, and so that was pretty, high quality job. And his wife, I forgot what she did, but I think she was maybe just a housewife at that time. She was taking care of the kids because the kids were small. So they helped us so much. They would host programs. We would do the programs. They had a nice flat. I remember you go to their apartment, you go upstairs, and their apartment covered the whole floor. And so you came to the front, you looked out the windows onto the main street. Then, they had bedrooms and stuff. And we stayed there a couple of times. So just really, really nice family. Really, and they were young. They were young. So it was just super encouraging. I did remember, and I'll get a little bit into, maybe or maybe not. But, obviously we had a point in the preaching in Ghana where, in the case, we had a family that was already made like this, but there was also families to be made. In other words, there was a time where we started to get some brahmacharis who wanted to be married, and obviously we had so many more female devotees start to join Vaishnavis. So, some marriages took place. I'll describe maybe one of those or something. I don't want to go down a whole track of that. I'll just describe some funny incidents, and because they all resolve very nicely, I'll describe them. I don't want to speak into people's personal lives and things like that. But this family in Takrady, it was one instance. I mean, both were very attractive, both the husband and wife. And apparently at some point, an issue came up where I guess somebody was inappropriate or wanting to be inappropriate or whatever with the wife. It wasn't a devotee, it was some secular person. But this husband, because he had faith in Krishna consciousness, he called us to counsel the family. So we came in and we spoke to them and did counseling and everything. So that was very nice as well. That we had a pragmatic role, besides just our preaching efforts, which we can't say are not practical, of course they are, but we were also able to do direct action, sort of practical things to help people in their negotiating Krishna consciousness. So that was very wonderful. I remember that was a very satisfying thing because they were such a crux part of our preaching in one of our expanded sanghas. So to have them wholesome and functioning was a good thing. I guess while I'm on the subject, I'll tell one funny story of one of our couples that was there in our crowd. There were two devotees. I mentioned that there was a devotee, her initiated name became Jaimini, and the devotee who once came a little bit early, his name was Ahimsa Prabhu. So Ahimsa Prabhu had been brahmachari for quite a while and everything, and Jaimini came and she had actually left a situation in her village. She was a princess, literally. Her father was a king in that village or whatever. So she really had royal status in their place in Nigeria. And I guess, she had an arranged marriage or something, but it did not work out. She came and eventually joined, the movement, and then she, was living in the temple with us. And she was a very amazing cook, both traditional food, and she learned how to cook all of the different Indian dishes. So she was a very amazing cook, and a lot of times she would head up cooking for the Sunday feast. But she was a very strong personality. Obviously, I don't know, the background of royalty and I guess being in a position where you kind of give more orders than you take. So she was a very strong personality, but very sweet as well. Ahimsa, on the other hand, he was the epitome of mildness, humility, soft-spoken, very intelligent, super intelligent devotee. Especially all the devotees would always, Prabhu in front of your name. So they would always go, Prabhu Akindra, Prabhu Rajalila, Prabhu Mahamandragu, or if they're addressing each other, they were always Prabhu first, then the name. So I remember being in my room and I was doing something or another, and I heard a little bit of commotion going on, a little bit of commotion. So I went out and I asked, what's going on and so forth, so on. So apparently, long story short, at this time they were associating. I don't think we had actually done the marriage yet. They were associating, but apparently they had some kind of disagreement. So anyways, I said, hey, well, don't, not out in the hallway, come on in. So I had them both come in, And I probably did ask Rajalila to come up because always, you know, if it was any of the ladies involved and so forth, and especially Rajalila, she has some expertise in counseling. I think that came out later on in the Institute specifically. But, you know, in terms of mediating things, you know, I think that's always been some skill that she's had. So I think she was in the room, and maybe Mahamantra Prabhu as well. So anyway, I remember, anyway, before we had everybody in the room, I think they came in, and she was standing up, and he immediately kind of paid his obeisances sort of thing. I, you know, paid my obeisances, everything, but she was standing up, and she was obviously, you know, a little heated, and he was saying, Prabhu Akindra, please, this lady. I remember saying like that. And she was just looking at him with like such a, like, I'll give you a good slap if you say one word. So I remember saying, you know, Jamini, go ahead and sit, you know, and she was saying, no, Prabhu Akindra, I want to stand on. I'm okay, I want to stand. So then I said, well, you know, explain to me what's going on. So then she looked at him and said, go ahead. So then, you know, he began explaining, I guess, whatever the difficulty was. Maybe she was being a little extra with him or whatever. But I think he got to one point and he mentioned something, and I guess she didn't think it was true. So she said, oh, you are a lie. Boy, I will put a wonderful mark on your face. So the way she said it, it wasn't really like a threat of immediate violence or anything. It was like a expression like, oh, because I think you're lying, listen, I will, you know, I'll give you a good slap. But the way she said it and the way he was kind of in a seated, kneeling position in front of me and everything, the whole event just, of course, I did not express any laughter. This is a very serious thing. But I just looked at the counterpoint, and of course, you think in your mind, well, in every relationship, there's some dominant personality. So, you know, you didn't want to have the image of, well, here's going to be a henpecked husband, because they had not quite got married yet. So the association also was looking at suitability, compatibility, and those kind of things, and whether they'd work together well in the service of Sri Guru and Gauranga. So, you know, that incident, you know, left a little doubt in the mind, but of course, later on they reconciled things and we were able to work it out. So I told the story because I thought it was a little funny, and it was probably funnier if you're there and you actually see the thing, or if you could see a picture of the two of them and their physical dispositions in relation to each other. It was really, really pretty funny. But I'm glad everything, you know, was worked out, because having other Grihastha couples was also important, because we needed to set a vision of Krishna consciousness being wholesome. In other words, we didn't have only, you know, our renunciant community, brahmachari sannyasis, but that you could be family and practice Krishna consciousness, because we started now also, especially in that Adolfo official town area, there were quite a few people who we had preached to who weren't moving in the temple. They were being devotees in their homes, and we would go there and set up picture altars, and they would chant and everything. And I remember one person, Pandu, and I'm sure Shanta Maharaj will straighten that out. He later did move into the temple, but I think for some time he was an accountant, I believe, by profession, and he was in his home and practicing Krishna consciousness. So we wanted to have good Grihastha couples so that example would be set. We had quite a few devotees. I'm trying to remember some of the devotees by name. There was a Bhakta Joseph who came, and he was, I don't know if he was from Ghana. He might have been from Ghana, but he was quite a super intelligent devotee, very serious, very focused, and I can't remember what his initiated name became, but he's a little important because he factors into the next story I'm going to tell. And I remember that when he came, he immediately just elevated. I mean, you know, from study of the books to got initiated. I think Bhakti Tirtha came, he got initiated, not by Bhakti Tirtha, because I don't think Bhakti Tirtha was still initiating then. But I think we were doing the writing by letter thing and then doing the initiations like that. You get a letter back, and then we would hold the yajna and do initiations. I know that went on for some time, and we initiated many people like that. So anyways, he figures in because he was one of the devotees who went to Liberia. So I'm going to kind of set up to tell this story about Liberia. And this is out of sequence because actually this happened while I was preaching in Nigeria. I remember one of the considerations for a alternative place after Nigeria was established was Sierra Leone, Cameroon, or Liberia. Liberia came up especially because there were the consideration of both Sierra Leone and Liberia were former places where slaves in America who were repatriated to Africa settled those places, Sierra Leone and Liberia. And, you know, at that time even, you know, there was, like English was, you know, the main language, and they even in Liberia, they used US dollars and local currency, kind of a mixture of the two. And we just wanted to experiment and see what that field would be like. So I remember there was a Friends of Krishna member that we had who was the manager of Nigerian Airways. So anytime we needed to get a ticket for something local, whatever, he was our resource. So he was being transferred to Liberia. And Brahmananda thought this is an excellent opportunity to kind of piggyback on a chance to find out what preaching in Liberia would be like. So, you know, at the time, this was a little earlier on, too. We were established in Nigeria, but, you know, not so many devotees. So it turned out that I was going to go alone. I was just going to go alone, but I was going to travel with this family and stay at their house. They had a home. I remember the street. It was called Congo Way, and it was in a relatively nice neighborhood in Liberia. And so I traveled with the family because the house was already set up and all of that. And I ended up staying with them at their house. And every day I would go out downtown Liberia. I had some books with me and everything. They paid for our ticket on Nigerian Airways and all of that. I had some books and everything, which we brought with us. And so I was going out. And at first, because obviously I wanted to assess the atmosphere of the place. I didn't just go out and start distributing books and so forth like we had been doing. But I went out and I started just kind of going around and looking at different groups, and I went to a few bookstores, and I even gave a few books away to kind of make an introduction. And I also remember like looking for different groups, like the Rosicrucian group or any other New Age kind of group or any kind of religious, you know, interfaith group or something, because that was generally a lot of ways how we introduced ourselves into preaching as well. And because I was by myself, you know, I didn't want to just venture out because, you know, Liberia, there was kind of reputation because there was a lot of political drama going on, both in Sierra Leone and in Liberia. There was a lot of political drama between factions and rebels and all these kind of things. You could just look it up. But anyways, so after a while, I felt a little more comfortable and I started selling some books on the street. And then one day while I was out, I saw two people coming, and I remember that in America, there was a group called the Hebrew Israelite Community. Later on, way later on in these narrations, there's going to be a big part about that group because we ended up becoming very close in affiliation with that group in terms of preaching and putting on programs, and we even went to Egypt and Israel. So that comes way later on in the narrations down the line. But anyways, in Liberia, I saw two people from that community. So, you know, they came up to me and they said, oh, you know, you're Krishna? I said, oh, yeah. You know, I says, oh, yeah, we're from America, you know, and we, you know, belong to Hebrew Israelite community. I mentioned, yeah, I saw, you know, I've seen, you know, the community there in America when I was there. And yeah, you know, nice to meet you. You know, and they invited me to come by their place. And they had opened a small kind of cafe restaurant thing. And of course, they're vegetarian and all that. So they invited me by to eat and everything. But, you know, we did not eat out. You know, devotees, that was a pretty strict thing. You don't really eat out so much. So, you know, I made some excuses. I found some ways to get around it. And even back at the place where we were with our Friends of Krishna member, I would always just take my meals there because they were in the Krishna consciousness, what have you. So anyways, though, he gave me some enlightenment. The gentleman who I was speaking to from the Hebrew Israelite community gave me some enlightenment about the place. He said, yeah, there's a lot going on here. You need to be careful. You want to stay away from speaking politics here, right? So you don't want to, in your preaching, you just, whatever you're doing, stay away from speaking politics here. So that was like a real insightful thing. And I said, yeah, okay, definitely, you know. So then the other thing I remember is passing a place which was a huge Masonic temple. Now, I don't know how much people may know or not know about the Masonic order, but it's a fraternity, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of all that they do and all of that. But anyway, that was something that I was like, okay, I got to find a way to meet some people from here, because I know in the Masonic order, people are interested in reading and esoteric things and so forth and so on. So I passed the building one day, and I remember coming out again the next day and going beeline direct to that building, and went there and it was closed. Okay, no problem. I went back another day, closed, then closed. So I was thinking, well, what's going on here? This place is never open. It's a huge building. It's never open. So then I, was talking to the the airline person where I was staying. I was saying, yeah, I've been going to this Masonic. It's always closed. And he said, no, I have no idea, why it would always be closed, but I have some friends here, and I can ask them. So he called somebody, and he asked on my behalf about the Masonic place there, and, I have a person here who wants to give some books, because we were going to give some books to their library. And the person said, no, that was shut down by the government, because they considered it a secret society of some sort, and they shut it down. So I was like, okay. So that was the atmosphere kind of there. So also, similar to Lagos, but in a different way, there was kind of sometimes kind of violent crime that would go on there. But the response to the violent crime was equally violent military responses to it. Like if you, did something wrong, they out to the beach and firing squad type of thing. So, that was the kind of atmosphere. So overall, I've been there, I think maybe 2 weeks or maybe 3 even. And I kind of made an assessment, and I took a flight, came back to Nigeria, and I told Brahmananda, I don't see Liberia as the very next place to go, because, it is a little dangerous, and, there's just a lot of unknowns about the place in terms of stability and so forth and so on. So we didn't go to Liberia. Of course, we ended up going to Ghana at that time. And later on from Nigeria, we actually sent a couple of devotees to Cameroon. Right, so there was a small contingent going on in Cameroon. We did not go to Sierra Leone because the similarities between Liberia and Sierra Leone were there. Later on, of course, devotees went up to preach and distribute books and everything. So fast forward. So this is not in sequence, because now we're into maybe 84, around that time, something like that, maybe 83, 84. But Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, there were 2 ladies who had come from America, and one was sent to I think she came to Zambia for a little while. I'll talk to Zambia preaching in another segment, but her name was Mahavegavati. And then another Mataji had come, who I had met originally in New Vrindavan, and so many people know her. Her name was Mother Ladini, and she was the epitome of service in Bhakti. She, from the time that I met her in New Vrindavan, she had her own Jagannath deities, and I know she was the Pujari, I believe, for the temple's Jagannath deities. And you can see her pictured here with Jagannath Baldev Subhadra, and I would imagine this was en route to maybe a Rath Yatra or something, because they're apparently in a vehicle. But her dedication to the service of Lord Jagannath and her service at the temple was like legendary. You would hear stories about her austerity. And I remember the first time I ever saw her in New Vrindavan, she had on a sari, and she had on these mud boots, which I guess come up to your knees or whatever. And she was trekking through the mud to go and do deity seva. And, sari, there was no question about, the sari being neat and clean, all that. It was mud splatters and all that kind of stuff. Because she would walk to these places, early in the morning, take cold baths and all that. Just like I remember the first time I went to New Vrindavan, for some kind of festival. And I remember taking bath. You could go to the lake, and the lake was frozen over, but it was rather thin in some places. So you just break the ice, and you had these cut off half-gallon milk containers. You dip it in there, and Hare Krishna, and you take your morning bath like that. So that was considered, like a wonderful austerity and purifying and all of that. So, but she was like the emblem of devotion in so many ways, in seriousness, her practice of bhakti, her dedication, her surrender in so many ways. So somehow I think, because I'm out of sequence, there's a lot of backstory that will probably come up once I get to the section on Central Africa. But she had hooked up with Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and was coming to preach in Africa. And Nigeria, Ghana were already established. I know she visited those places, I believe. But ultimately, she was going to go to Liberia. Now, when she was going to go there to start the preaching, I think by that time I was actually in Zimbabwe, perhaps. No, actually, let me see. Either in Zimbabwe, or I remember I had taken a break and I had gone back to America for a minute. But at any rate, I want to stick to her story. She had gone to Liberia and she began preaching. She had a company of, I think, some devotees from Ghana, including, which is why I brought up his name, that devotee Bhakti Joseph, right? Who later, I can't remember his initiated name, Jyotidas. I think Jyotidas became his name. So himself, some other devotees. I don't know if Shankar went to Liberia or not. I'm going to have to ask Shant Maharaj. But she had a nice little contingent of devotees. And then they established a small preaching center. They're in Liberia. They were going out regularly on Sankirtan and Harinam, and she was cooking, and they were passing out prasadam. They had, quite a thing going on. The person who was in charge of the government, there were two different parties there. There was the party of Doe and another one. I can't remember this guy's name right offhand. I'll have to look it up. Maybe I'll get back to you in the next segment. But anyway, there was a constant battle between these two. So when she went, Prince William or something like that, who was the second person who had taken over from Doe. And there was a constant, still kind of undercurrent battle going on there. But anyway, that guy, Prince Charles or something like that, I think it was. Anyway, he was in charge. And somehow or another, it is, a European body in Africa in general, in some circumstances, outstanding, but a Hare Krishna female in a white body, that's also going to be outstanding, especially because obviously she was the most senior devotee and she's leading all of the activities, and she's the one who's the prominent front person in everything. So, word got back, I would imagine, to the leader, that guy. I'm going to try to look up his name if I can. Let me just do this right quick because I want to be able to narrate clearly. Oh yes, Charles Taylor, that was him. Yep, he was the one who had taken over. So anyway, she had started to do a lot of activities. She was even distributing prasadam and a number of other things, and feeding hungry children and all these kind of things. So obviously, word gets around, and the political element came to take note of it, and they were very happy, with the activities she was doing. So she somehow or another got invited to meet with the leader, and she went and she met with him, and she I think on one of the meetings spoke about all the things that they were doing and so forth and so on, and they were behind her. So even the government was willing to sponsor some of her activities. So they were helping. I think they were giving facility or whatever for them to distribute food, and even giving some of the boga which they could make and then distribute the food and so forth, so on. So apparently things seem to be working out with the relationship between the government officials and the newly established preaching center there. So this went on, I think, for some time. And I think she met him on more than one occasion. And I believe she became comfortable, because the government was supportive of everything, and it seemed very comfortable, and the preaching was expanding. Like I said, and she is super dedicated. You can't understand, how much she would put her heart and soul into everything she did. So she started to feel comfortable enough that whenever something would go wrong, whenever something was not proper, she would speak up on it. So at one point, the atmosphere there started to become a little unstable. There was more rebel activity, things like that. So Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj had asked her to perhaps consider, that we had distributed books, we had done some things, perhaps to consider, coming to another place, just going to a different area to preach, and maybe not staying in Liberia, because when these countries become dangerous, they could become seriously dangerous. So she said she felt fine, because the government was supportive, and she had the contingency of the devotees there, including some local devotees who could kind of keep a pulse on things. And because the nature of the preaching was going very strongly, she felt like she didn't want to abandon it. So Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, he was not comfortable. He kind of, would acquiesce from time to time with her wish to stay, but then at other times he would, insist that she should leave, and that those devotees could come to Ghana, or other sort of things. So she was pretty, headstrong that no, I feel safe. I think, we can manage everything. So I remember it came to a point, and it must have been while I was back in America. I have not gotten to that section of, I left Ghana, I think, in 1983. I came back on a brief stint to see my parents, which I guess I'll talk about next. And while I was there, I remember Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj talking to her on the phone. And I remember him asking me to, because I had been to Liberia, he wanted to get another person to speak to her, perhaps, since I had been there and I had seen some of the undercurrent of stuff that goes on there, that maybe she would take it that because I had been there for some time or whatever, even though it wasn't a long time, she would take another opinion and maybe reconsider. Anyway, long story short, I spoke to her on the telephone, and I mentioned, I had been to Liberia, and I'd even spoken to some other Americans who were there, and they particularly told me that the political thing was very volatile, and that, whatever you do here, don't become involved in it and don't speak to it. But of course, by that time it was too late. She had already made inroads, and apparently was helping the preaching. So, from all accounts, it was like, well, why would we not? Why would we not go on and continue? So, anyways, I spoke to her on the phone and said, I just outright think it's dangerous. I think what you've done there thus far is really good, just like Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj has mentioned. And it might be better to, you can always go back. If things stabilize, you can always go back. You have an infrastructure now, and you could always get support, to go back. So then, she was like, well, I'll consider it, and everything. And, but, you could tell she was kind of dedicated to the preaching. So anyways, to bring things to a head here, apparently, which was, things that happened from time to time, there was some kind of misbehavior in the administration. And she felt comfortable enough that in one of her meetings, she spoke out against what was inappropriate about what this leader was doing. So nothing happened at the time. She came back to the temple, and, devotees went on with their normal activities, right? But then, in the suddenness, of, you know, the volatility that we talked about with these kind of leaders, these kind of personalities, they sent a squad of soldiers over to the temple and literally started rounding up the devotees. And I think 2 devotees, including Jyoti, and one other devotee, they jumped from the back window and they were able to escape. But Mother Ladini was rounded up along with some of the Ghanaian devotees and some of the local devotees, and the soldiers took them out to the beach to execute them. They weren't originally planning, I know, to execute Mother Ladini, because then you have implications of having an American citizen there and so forth and so on. And so I don't think, you know, they probably knew better in a political sense than to go down that pike. But once they had the devotees lined up and they started executing the devotees, she jumped in. She jumped in to stop it. And when she jumped in to stop it, she was killed in that attempt. So there are almost no words that can describe, you know, I mean, many times we also speak about our willingness to give our lives to Krishna consciousness. But Krishna consciousness means Vaishnav Seva. So, you know, how many people in earnest, you know, could think in their hearts that at that time, at a time like that, seeing the situation, which was untenable. You know, you have all these soldiers with firearms, they're determined to do what they're going to do, but you sacrifice your own self, you know, perhaps with the idea that once they had shot her, they would immediately stop, realizing they had shot an American citizen and so forth and so on. But she jumped in and gave her own life in an attempt to save these devotees, whom, you know, she had met when she came to Africa. It wasn't like they were relatives, long-standing devotional relationships. These were devotees, but she considered that they were serving Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada, and that they were in her charge, and she literally gave her life to save those devotees. Of course, you know, those devotees who were on the beach were killed, but the 2 that had escaped, maybe 2 or 3 had escaped, and so forth and so on. So this was a big thing, and I remember Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj being very distraught, you know, about it, and all the devotees. Of course, throughout the New Vrindavan community, it resonated, you know, and throughout the whole devotional community. I don't want to pinpoint any place. Everywhere it resonated how much of a tragedy this was. But it also spoke to the power of what, you know, somebody who has fixed devotion is willing to and can do. Because, you know, there were many, you know, sort of outpourings from that in various ways. For some people, many negative things, you know, they wanted to blame, you know, Maharaj for having her there. There was a lot of that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to get into that or talk about it. But there were many people who just, hearing about the nature of the story and also hearing how in a very real sense, someone executed saving the lives of devotees and showing what really Krishna consciousness is. Because, you know, you're not tested at the kirtan. You're not tested at the Mahaprasadam or at the feast or at the Janmashtami feast or at the, you know, the times when there's wonderful Harikatha. That's not as much as when you're tested as when you're at the time of death. And especially when that death is imminent and immediate and right before you. You know, even when there's long-term illnesses and people have a chance to reconcile with their mortality and have the association of devotees and build your consciousness, that's one thing. But when death is imminent, it's another test to your Krishna consciousness, one that's very serious. And that she demonstrated that her Krishna consciousness was at a level where she could have gotten herself out of that. But she didn't. She gave her life in an attempt to save the lives of those devotees. So she, in a demonstrated way, showed how her Krishna consciousness was real. Because at the time of an imminent test, she showed that it was there. So it was always something that stuck with me as well. I didn't have a lot of association with her, just like I said at New Vrindavan, seeing her in that environment. Then again, seeing her, I think when she was on the way to Africa the first time and all of that. And then, you know, speaking to her on the phone in an attempt to, you know, get her to leave Liberia. So, anyways, all glories to the service and to the dedication of Mother Ladini. And we pray that Srila Prabhupada and our Guru Parampara has, cuddled her soul and awarded her Transcendental Association of Mahaprabhu and Shri Radha Krishna. So, I'm probably getting close to my hour, so I'm thinking I may pick up. I wanted to try to conclude with the last part of the pastimes of preaching in Ghana. Maybe I'll end with one story so we end on a lighter note. We had been doing a lot of preaching in Ghana and expanding, as I mentioned. So one of the places that we went was to preach at the University of Cape Coast. So I've been wanting to do this for quite some time, and there were a couple of reasons. I told you a great deal of my going to Africa to preach in the first place was sort of, fulfillments of things that were in my karmic portfolio as well. Things that related to having been born in an African-American body and so forth and so on, having dealt with, a lot of Afrocentric studies and so forth like that. And in particular, I told that my uncle had mentioned to me, he was the one who taught me yoga in the beginning, that's in that very first narration. He told me that, if you could get off the Bali platform, you'll be able to do amazing things for your people. And here I found myself now in Africa, in the mission of Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada and Guru Parampara, and actually doing conscious work, which is the ultimate thing, because really, everything else pales in comparison to watching a person's consciousness become reformed and transcendent, right? There is no greater service to humanity than to watch consciousness reach its potential. So because we were engaged in that work, that was the most fulfilling thing. But there were some things that, in my own, karmic portfolio, it would be fulfilled also just by, being in the mission of Sriman Mahaprabhu. So we went to preach in Cape Coast at the university. So in Cape Coast, there's also the port and the place from where, literally hundreds of thousands of slaves were taken from Africa and brought to the New World, so to speak. So to have a chance to see this place firsthand, I'd heard about it before, but to see this place firsthand was going to be, a pretty amazing thing. So I'm going to show a couple of pictures. So this is the facility at Cape Coast. I think it's called Elimina. Or maybe that's another one. I think there are two of them. But this is at Cape Coast. And this is what I think the front of the facility looked like. It was a huge thing because you had, people staying there, obviously, who were the managers of the, working of the, transition of the slaves. And then I want to see if I can find, here's another picture which kind of shows the backside. And you can see that it's right up on the ocean. So it's right up on the ocean. So this is the backside of it. And you can see the cannons that were there. That's not me. That's not any devotees. That's just a random person in the picture. But you could see they defended it. So it was like a fort, a fort castle sort of thing. And they, would have the protection by all those cannons and everything. And then when the slaves were about ready to be transported, I went inside of this place. This was the corridor that they would walk down, and you could see a doorway at the end there. That doorway led right onto a ramp that goes down, and they would go right up onto the ship. So, of course, they were all shackled, chained, everything. And the conditions, the living conditions were obviously, horrible and all of that. So I know many people have taken tours to Ghana and have gone to both, this castle, and I think there's another one in Limino, maybe it's the same. And they've had a lot of catharsis in terms of sort of, race karma or whatever it is, about experiencing, seeing where the ancestral line of the body you're born in, where they came or how they came and from where they came, to the New World, so to speak. So that was one very, very interesting thing about the trip. You know, I even spoke to some of the devotees, I remember while we were visiting there, about how things were in America as a result of the slave trade, and how much cultural, you know, vacuuming had been done to African Americans who were now in Africa, and what slavery had done to them, and, you know, all those kind of things. So that was a very, very interesting thing, and I thought it was also something that wasn't completely detached from Krishna consciousness, because it was also a chance to explain how whatever karmic portfolio we have, whatever body we're born into with that karma, we have to see that as a lesson in growing in Krishna consciousness. So you cannot become attached to the body, neither you can become dismissive of the body and its karma, right? Because it's something in that karma and something in everything related to that karma, the family you're born in, the karmic history of that family, everything else, that has bearings on your bhakti, right? So you want to be able to understand those things, and at the same time, by the deep practice of bhakti under guidance of Sudha Vaishnavas, to be able to work through all of those things and to find a way to get back to the actual nature of the jiva, which is the Sudha Atma, the pure Atma, as the Das of Shri Radha Krishna Mahaprabhu. So karmic portfolio and understanding it is also, it can be a help. But of course, if you get too much into it, it can be a hindrance, because if you become attached to the body and the whole karmic portfolio you have, you can become sidetracked from actually the pure path of bhakti. So you want to understand it so that it can be a lesson for you on the path of bhakti. And I think my uncle was very excellent at pointing that out, that you've been born in the African American body with this history, which my uncle, one of my other uncles, had done, traced our history back to a particular part of Africa and everything. So you understand all of this. But now, what is your job? It's to raise consciousness. And the greatest service you can do with your attachment to your karmic portfolio is serve those in the same arrangement by, you know, preaching Krishna consciousness and raising the consciousness of people. So anyway, I want to, you know, detract from our essential thing, which is talking about the actual preaching there. So while we were there, which was our main purpose for being there, we were going to be giving a lecture at the University of Ghana at Cape Coast. So everything was set up for it. It was being sponsored by one professor who taught interreligious studies and philosophy, and he was from Sri Lanka. So we were going to have a series of classes there, and he invited us to come up to the university. So we were there for at least 5 days, 6 days, and we were giving various classes, because he not only has one class, obviously, he has many. So we would go back and we were giving the classes, and we would do Harinam, and we would, give our class, present Vedic culture. And at that time, especially, I was presenting not only the Vedic culture, but its similarities and relationship to Africa and, like that. So, many of the students, they were really, really, liking it and so forth. And the question and answer periods would be like very long and very wonderful. And devotees would spread out, and they would each have different groups, and they would be preaching. Then we would go out onto the campus, and in the broader student body, we would also begin preaching. So give me 1 second. I have a call come through. I'm going to have to address that. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. All right. So it was really, really wonderful. So there's always a little humor to everything, and I know this is going to be like teasing Pujapat Shanta Maharaj. But while we were staying in Cape Coast, the professor, who was from Sri Lanka, his daughter came to visit. She had just graduated from school in England, and so she came to visit. So she was staying there with her father. I don't think the mother was there. I think the mother was actually away. I cannot remember. But anyway, so the daughter came back to visit. So the flat we were staying in was literally right next door to the professor. He had arranged this place for us to stay. It was right next door to him. So, we would kind of go over and visit him and preach and everything. And then, go back into the flat. We would do our morning program there and everything like that. And I remember when I was up at the university also, I saw like a kind of music department. And I remember they had a practice room with a piano in it. So I remember every day after the morning, not every day, what am I saying? I think it was a couple of days after the morning program with the devotees, I would go for a japa walk. I would go up to the campus. And I remember going in the music room there, and I'm bringing this up because I actually wrote one song that I ended up putting on an album that I did. I wrote that song at that time at Cape Coast on that piano. So that's just a sidebar. But anyways, as we were having nightly, programs between his house, because also, this was the other thing, he would invite professors and other people to come over to his house. So not only were we doing programs at the university, but we would go over to his flat and we would have more informal programs and questions and answers there. So, but his daughter was visiting, and here comes the comedy. So the daughter was very, she had seen devotees in the UK and everything, and so she was pretty enchanted by hearing the preaching and everything. And so she would come over to the flat, each day and participate in some of the programs and everything. And at that time, Mantra Prabhu, she would ask some questions, and she had a lot of questions. So he would spend time, because he was very, accomplished in the philosophy and everything. So he'd spend time explaining everything to her, and there was nothing inappropriate because, we were all in the same flat, so there was nothing inappropriate. But somehow or another, she became infatuated with Ma Mantra. So she was, a very beautiful, girl and everything. And the family is obviously Indian family from Sri Lanka and so forth, so on. And she became really, really attracted to Ma Mantra Prabhu. And I remember her talking, and I remember later on talking to Ma Mantra Prabhu. Anyway, long story short, she had a whole idea that he could move to England. He could move to England, they could marry, and he could be a devotee in England, and all of these kind of things. So I don't know where this whole idea, emerged from. But, I wasn't having it, I mean, I don't have anything to say. Ma Mantra would have to make up his own mind, but he's like one of the chief stalwart devotees there. I know Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj wasn't having it, So, but anyways, he wasn't having it. He was like, she's extremely, attractive, all these kind of things. And he was not married, so there would have been no harm. But, he was dedicated. Like I said, the brahmacharis who were there were dedicated. So he was like, well, no, I really don't want to do this. But he also did not want to really, hurt her feelings or anything like that, especially because we had such a nice relationship with the father for preaching at Cape Coast. So I remember we were negotiating this whole thing about how to get out of this. And I don't know, we might have asked Brother Leela to do some intervention, in terms of like talking to her or so forth, so on. I believe, I can't remember, that I'm conjecturing on because I can't remember exactly how things played out. But anyway, long story short, our Ma Mantra Prabhu was saved from that. She had to go back to England at a certain point. And I think he just agreed to write and they would stay in touch or something like that. But, he had no intention of leaving and going and moving to the UK and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, that was a pretty funny story because I remember the anxiety on his face about how to negotiate all of these things was going on while we were still there for the last couple of days. And I remember when she was getting ready to leave, and we were also getting ready to leave to go back to Accra, his status of relief was so great because he was like, oh, he managed to save the preaching by not, outright telling her, well, no, I'm a brahmachari, I'm not getting married, so on and so on, because she had a genuine infatuation with him, and, it is what it is. So, anyway, so we finally were able to have very successful preaching there, which we followed up, and we went back to Cape Coast. I know Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj also went there preaching, and so forth. So anyway, that's a happier note to end on. I think I certainly have gone about an hour. Probably in the next segment, I'll talk about, once we get back to Accra, I'm pretty much winding up. I'm seeing that Ghana has been established, and also I've not been back to America since 1979, since I had come. And my parents were getting a little elderly and so forth, so on. And so there was some consideration about going back, and it would be a good thing that I did, because actually I went back and I was able to go. Maybe I'll end with that story. I'll end with that. So anyways, when I went back to Accra, after some time, we continued all the preaching as usual. And this had to be around 1983. And I had spoken about Tirtha Maharaj about coming back to America for a little while. My plan was to come back to America and then come back to Ghana, because I was kind of feeling at home in Ghana, and I know our mission originally was to try to open temples in different places, but as I mentioned, a contingent had gone to Cameroon, and we had decided at that time, this is before Ladini went to Liberia, we decided Liberia was a little dangerous, and Sierra Leone. We started looking at Gabon, and also we had a contingent go to Ivory Coast. That's the first contingent going to Ivory Coast, and I mentioned we'd already been doing some preaching in Togo, so we had expanded even outside of Ghana. But anyway, my plan was to come to America, see my parents, do a few things, and then maybe come back to Ghana. So anyways, Brajalila, she had come back to America a couple of times for the Christmas Marathon, because she would raise funds both for Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj's projects in America and raise some funds for helping out preaching in Africa. So I had decided in '83 I was going to go. Brajalila was going to stay there in Ghana and not come back right away, because then you would have somebody who was, besides Mamantra Prabhu, and we had a couple of other senior devotees by that time, but you also had Brajalila there who could, oversee a lot of things also, and Raivata Muni, the other devotee, was running the Gurukul. So anyways, I left Ghana, I believe it was 1983, and I came back to America. I came to New York, and of course the 55th Street Temple wasn't there anymore. And, I come to see my parents. I went and I stayed at my father's house for, a little while. And, he was always very favorable to me, being in Krishna consciousness. He was whatever makes you happy. I'm happy with that. My mother, on the other hand, was like, she was excessively proud of me being in Krishna consciousness. So my mother had moved to Denver at that point, and I was going to go to visit her. So I got my ticket and everything, and I went by bus, I remember, all the way out to Denver, Colorado. My mother was living there then. My sister lives there. She was living in Aurora. My mother had her own place in Denver. And I think my brother might have even been in Denver at the time. So anyways, I went and I went out. My mother was still working at that time. She was working at some office complex there in Denver. And I remember I had always worn, a dhoti, tilak, kurta, everything every day. I mean, because in Ghana and Africa in general, there was never any reason to put on, karmi clothes. So for the first time in so many years, I had karmi clothes on. When I was staying at my father's house, and then when I went out to Denver, and then when I got to Denver, I had karmi clothes on. So I remember, I think I stayed with my brother, and I was going to go up to meet my mother at her job. So I remember taking a taxi up there, something like that, and I went into my mother's job, and my mother had all these ladies and different people lined up, in her office, and when I came in, obviously, I hugged my mother, everything. My mother, how we doing? Then my mother looked at me. She kind of looked at me up and down and says, where's your uniform? And I was like, what? What is she doing? What uniform? What do you, I was like looking a little bit bewildered. I said, where's your Krishna uniform? Right? So apparently my mother had told the people that she worked with that I was like some kind of leading personality in Hare Krishnas, and that we had our own specialized dress and everything else. And so she was expecting me to show up in dhoti, kurta, tilak, everything else, which I don't know why I wouldn't, actually being a devotee. But, I wore, secular clothes thinking, well, I don't want to, come to my mother's job, maybe dressed like that. So my mother was like, I told them all, like, you're the Krishnas, you're supposed to have on your, everything. I still have my Sikh and everything. I was shaved up. But, so anyway, I thought that was the funniest thing in the world. So, people at our job were asking me about Krishna consciousness. So I'm thinking, wow, this is like an amazing preaching opportunity. So anyways, I went and I stayed at my mother's house for some time, and then I came back. And I think I'll pick up the next segment here, because the next segment, now we actually are leaving West Africa, and I think Roger Leela's also come back to America. And there's a decision for us to go back to Africa, but now we're going to be going back to Central Africa. So I think we'll pick that up in the next installment. Again, thank the devotees who are watching, and any devotees who were in Africa. Always offer my Dandavat Pranam. I do want to mention, as far as our West African preaching is concerned, there were a number of other devotees who did also make contributions and come there. Upananda Prabhu, who is now Bhaktivedanta Avadut Maharaj. Sikhi Mahidi Prabhu actually came to Africa. He's in Atlanta, but he had come through. And then another devotee named Partamrita Prabhu. He came through for a very short time and at an awkward time because there was some other stuff going on. But one thing that he did was that when he came, unfortunately the politics of different sanghas was something that was not present really in Africa. First of all, maybe I'll mention this while I'm here before I end. We had no politics in Africa the whole time. I would hear occasionally from time to time, this person had a fall down, there was this and that, but none of that drama ever touched the African Yatra. Nobody ever had a crisis of faith. We never talked about, who did what, how did, we never got into those things. I would hear about it on the wire, or I'd get some letter or something like that, but none of that ever had any influence in Africa. Partamrita Prabhu, he was a disciple of Our Srila Prabhupada, and he had gone to take Siksha from Srila Bhakti Rakshak Srila Goswami Maharaj, who was a godbrother of Our Srila Prabhupada, of course, for many of you know him. And when Partamrita came to Africa, he had already taken sannyas from Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and he came with the intention of doing preaching, but because of, the kind of, the upheavals of what were going on as far as ISKCON Sangha was concerned, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj and all of that at that time, that wasn't something that was being accommodated in the temples. Now, I welcomed him certainly to come and stay in the temple because he's Vaishnava, right? So he was, able to come and stay in the temple, everything. And, I was there, and, I felt that I had enough grasp of Srila Prabhupada's books and everything that if he spoke something wrong, and Mahamantra, Raja Leela, something is there, then, corrections could be made. So we offered him the etiquette to speak. I think in Nigeria they did the same because, I also had devotees there who were philosophically and siddhantically capable to know if something was off or not. So, and he didn't speak anything siddhantically not correct or anything. But anyways, he wanted to move on and kind of establish his own preaching. But the reason I brought him up is because he left, and I ended up bringing him back to America. He left in Ghana 200 audio tapes of darshans and classes with Srila Sridhar Maharaj, as well as a Jaiva Dharma, which is the first time I'd ever saw the book of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Jaiva Dharma. I still have that book, actually. It's got a blue cover on it. I ended up getting another one when I went to India. I went to Madras, and I went to the Gaudiya Math Madras. I bought one there. But this was the first one I had, was a blue-colored one that he had, and another book. I can't remember what the other book was, but I obviously started reading them. I was, avid studying Shastra and all of that. And I was listening to those tapes, and I brought them back when I came to America. And I remember ended up giving them to Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. And what we would do was, he would have half and I would have half. I would listen to my half and give him that, and he would give me the others, and we would keep exchanging like that. So I remember bringing them back to America. So anyway, that was just a tidbit and also a way of offering for the devotees I can immediately remember offhand who were making contributions to our preaching in Africa. There are many more, and if I've forgotten anybody, certainly if you ever see this, you could write in, and please forgive me at the same time. Jai Shishi Guru Gauranga Gandhavika Giridhari Shishi Arabino Bihariju Shishi Gaur Gadara Shishi Arabalabju Ki Jai 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 Shishi Radhe Radhe Radhe.